Good morning, everyone, and we're thankful that you were able to join us today at our Thursday, December 17th TACIR Commission meeting, remote meeting. And as we begin the meeting, prior to Cliff reading the official public meeting notice, I did just want to give a quick word and update from our chairman, Representative Mike Carter. I spoke to Chairman Carter this morning just before we began the Zoom call, and it was a very positive phone call. He thanks everyone for the thoughts and prayers and concern. He says he had a very full day yesterday at Vanderbilt, and in spite of the other bad reports that he's been getting, yesterday he received a good report, and he wanted me to express his appreciation to the commission. He is still fighting. We all know Chairman Carter, and he very much wishes he could be here. They are advising him to stay home and stay healthy. And I told him that I would personally express his sentiments to TACIR this morning. And on a personal note, I can't tell you all how much I'm grateful that everyone has been checking on him and sending him good wishes. He needs that at this time of year. So thank you for allowing me to do this, Cliff, and let's proceed with the public meeting notice.
Let me unmute myself. Sorry about that. So yes, I'll go ahead and start with the statement of necessity, Mayor, and then we can move on to the minutes. Pursuant to Tennessee Code Annotated Section 410105A, the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations is to hold meetings quarterly and at such other times as it deems necessary. To meet this requirement, the Commission scheduled a meeting for December 17, 2020. Because of the COVID pandemic and related safety protocols, it was determined that a physical quorum of the members could not assemble in person. Therefore, the Commission chose to meet via teleconference. Mr. Chairman, that is our statement of necessity.
Great, thank you so much for that necessity this morning. And that takes us to the agenda. Cliff, do you want to do a quick agenda review before we do the minutes votes without objection, or would you rather do the vote first?
I'm happy to, Chairman. I can even pull that over here. This is tab 1, the agenda. As you'll recall, in addition to our normal commission and staff update at the last meeting, we went over we had a rather lengthy panel on the status of broadband internet deployment, availability, and adoption. You'll be hearing the draft report presentation from Dr. Owen a little bit later this morning. And the play-by-play, transcription, edited transcription, if you will, of that panel is included in the minutes. And then after that, we also had a draft report on our small cell report, which we will actually have that report for final approval today. And then we received a draft report on local revenue and services. We'll have that one for final approval today. We had a draft report on right to shop, which Jennifer Berry went over, and we'll have that for approval today. And that was the bulk of the minutes, Mr. Chairman.
Great, thank you. And due to the electronic nature of this meeting, we will take a vote without objection. This does not have to be a roll call vote for the accepting of the November 20 minutes. Without objection, we will accept those. Do we hear any objection on the acceptance of the November 2020 minutes? Hearing none, those minutes are accepted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just as a programming note, the next 4 or 5 votes, we will have to take a roll call vote because those will be for the record. Dr. Lippert, if you'll take us now to tab 2.
Okay, Mr. Chairman. So tab 2 is the commission and staff updates. And the one thing I wanted to bring to the attention of the members as part of the commission update is an additional, I would almost call it a spin-off report, a follow-up report as part of our public infrastructure needs inventory that we've initiated this year in response to COVID-19 and its effect and potential effect on the public infrastructure priorities, as well as the capacity of our state and local governments to pursue existing infrastructure priorities. So this is something that we've started working on. It's going to be a more of a long-term project in two phases. The first phase is reviewing historical information on the time it normally takes for these projects to go through their entire cycle of production. And we'll be keying in on how earlier historical economic crises and et cetera have affected those priorities. And then we'll be looking deeper at how the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting it. And we'll be surveying local officials, city and county mayors across the state, and have actually already initiated that process. I'd like to thank our own local members for their feedback and input on the development of that survey form. That was very helpful. And so that's just a reminder that as we're waiting for new projects to come to us with the start of the next session of the General Assembly, we are continuing to try to be as helpful as we can to the state and our local governments, particularly in this time of this pandemic. And that's the commission update, Mr. Chairman. I do have a brief staff update as well. First of all, Research Manager Mark McAdoo has recently graduated from the Tennessee Government Management Institute. And this is the state's comprehensive mid-management development program. And Senior Research Associate Tyler Carpenter has completed Lead Tennessee, which is the state's program for developing emerging leaders. So if you could, everyone, just join me in congratulating Dr. McAdoo and Tyler on their accomplishments. Woo! Yeah. Very good. Thank you.
Congratulations.
And that is the commission and staff update.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lippert, and congratulations to both Mark and Tyler on their accomplishments. We join the commission congratulating them. That rapidly takes us to tab number 3, Dr. Lippert, and I will let you make the proper introductions of Dr. Owen.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to switch the presenter and give Dr. Owen the screen. This as Matt will go over this.
Could I ask one quick question?
Certainly.
In the light that we have just barely a quorum, would it be in the best interest of the commission's time to get through some of these votes that we have to take prior to Dr. Owen's report? I'm looking down the list. Senator Lundberg is in Colorado and is having trouble logging in, and Representative Harold Love is about to log in, but we're so close to not having a quorum. Without objection, I would offer that alternative agenda.
I think it's a very prudent course of action, Mr. Chairman. And unless any of the members object, I'm be happy to hold Dr. Owen's presentation. It is going to be the longest presentation of the day. That's just the way Matt rolls. And then we are going to, it's a joke, Matt, calm down. And then I'd be happy to move on to tab number 4, which is one of the reports requiring approval. That also is Dr. Owen, so he can maintain control of the screen for a moment here.
Great. Without objection by any of the commission members, we will proceed to tab 4 and get some of these roll call votes out of the way.
Well, it looks like you're all still stuck with me. But thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Cliff, and thank you, members. I will proceed with the presentation of our report, our final report on the small cell wireless facilities for your approval. You can find copies of the final report, the one-page summary of the report's findings and recommendations, and the associated memo in the materials for tab 4. The report is being prepared in response to Public Chapter 819, Acts of 2018, the Competitive Wireless Broadband Investment, Deployment, and Safety Act, which established a statewide framework governing state and local regulation of small cell wireless facilities located in public rights-of-way. Among the Act's provisions, it directs the Commission to study the effects of the Act, including its effect on the deployment of broadband, the fiscal effect resulting from the administrative processes required by the Act, best practices, both from the perspective of small cell applicants, local governments, and the state, and from a review of other states, and opportunities to advance the quality of transportation in the state by utilizing technological applications, sometimes referred to as smart transportation applications, that are supported by small cells. The Act also directs the Commission to make recommendations for any changes based on its findings. Since we presented the draft report in November, we have made no substantive changes to the draft or its recommendations. And so I'll just briefly review those recommendations before seeking approval of the report. So both of the recommendations in the report, there are two recommendations, and both deal with the effect that small cells could have on community aesthetics. The aesthetic effects of small cells were by far the most widespread concern raised by local officials in our interviews for this project, and they were mentioned by nearly every local official who we interviewed. Public Chapter 819 preserves at least some local authority to require that small cells conform to adopted aesthetic standards, provided that those standards are non-discriminatory, generally applicable to other entities deploying infrastructure in public rights-of-way, and provided that they don't preclude all deployment of small cells. Because the aesthetic concerns are unlikely to diminish as the number of small cells increases, the report includes a recommendation for local governments. It encourages them to update their existing ordinances that set aesthetic standards for their communities to ensure that those requirements apply to small cells, and to also include small cells in any new standards that they adopt. The report further notes that adopting aesthetic standards is unlikely to fully address the concerns of some local officials that in the long term, the installation of numerous new poles in public rights-of-way could create visual clutter. And this concern was less about the aesthetic appearance of any single pole and more about the collective effect of multiple sets of poles from multiple different providers being put in the right-of-way. The aesthetic standards that are currently authorized under the Act must comply with other provisions in the Act. Under these provisions, local governments must allow small cell applicants to seek waivers that would authorize the placement of new poles for small cells in areas where electric, cable, and other communications infrastructure is otherwise required to be underground. Local governments cannot require that small cells be placed on specific poles or specific types of poles, preventing them from requiring co-location on existing poles. And they cannot require that small cells or the poles supporting them be spaced a minimum distance apart. Because of the large number of small cells that the wireless industry expects to deploy and the effect on community aesthetics that could result from the installation of new poles to support these facilities, the report includes a second recommendation related to aesthetics, this time for the state. Specifically, it recommends that the General Assembly could consider authorizing local governments to require co-location of small cells in areas with existing poles. The draft qualifies this recommendation, noting that some new poles will be necessary to improve wireless service, given the limited distance traveled by some of the signals used by providers. So in qualifying this recommendation, the report says that care would need to be taken to ensure that this authority could not be used to deploy or to block the deployment of small cells in situations where applicants can demonstrate that co-location is not feasible, either for technical reasons or because of added costs. And because co-location will likely involve the use of electric utility poles, any co-location requirements should also ensure the continued authority of local power companies to protect the safety and reliability of the electric grid. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to address any questions you may have before seeking approval of the report.
Thank you, Dr. Owen, for that report review. And we are now open for questions or comments from members of the commission. Dr. Lippard and April, if you'll help me, I can't see everyone's screen, but if someone notifies that they have a question or comment, please feel free to address that.
This is Jill Holland. I just have one question. I think I understood it correctly, but from what I believe that you said and the report says, is that the local government does have say over the aesthetics of the pole and the small cell, but they cannot say this is how we want them placed. As far as location or which poles to put them on, the local government does not have the power to determine that. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question, Mayor Holland. That is our understanding, that currently any aesthetic standards that are adopted must be non-discriminatory, generally applicable to other utilities, and can't preclude the deployment of small cells. So to that end, like you said, it also has to comply with those other provisions of the Act. So I think your understanding.
Okay. Thank you so much. I just wanted to make sure. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you for that question, Mayor Holland. Are there any other comments or questions or concerns prior to the vote?
I'm not seeing any questions, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Does this require a motion prior to the vote?
It does, Mayor.
If there will be a motion for the acceptance of this final report?
So moved. Mayor Bickers, I'll second.
Dr. Lippert, I believe that was motion by Bradshaw, seconded by Mayor Vickers.
Very good, Mr. Chairman. Then April, if you will proceed with the roll call vote, please.
Yes, sir. Mayor Anderson, Commissioner Arnold,
Aye.
I'm sorry.
He
I didn't
said
get-
aye.
Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Arnold votes aye. Mayor Bickers,
Aye.
Mayor Bickers votes aye. Mayor Bradshaw,
Aye.
Mayor Bradshaw votes aye. Mayor Brooks,
Brooks votes aye.
Mayor Brooks votes aye. Representative Carter, Mr. Clifton,
Clifton votes aye.
Mr. Clifton votes aye. Representative Crawford,
Aye.
Representative Crawford votes aye. Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Davis votes aye. County Clerk Mary Gaither,
Aye.
County Clerk Gaither votes aye. Mayor Terry Frank,
Mayor Frank votes aye.
Mayor Frank votes aye. Mayor Jill Holland,
Aye.
Mayor Holland votes aye. County Executive Jeff Huffman, Representative Harold Love,
Aye.
Representative Love votes aye. Senator John Lundberg, Representative Susan Lynn, Mayor Keith McDonald, just in case. Representative Antonio Parkinson, Mr. Jeff Peach,
Mr. Peach is on there. I think he said aye, but he may be muted.
No, it's showing me. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, I can hear. How do you vote, sir?
Aye, sorry.
Okay, Mr. Peach votes aye. Senator Katrina Robinson, Mayor Larry Waters.
Aye.
Mayor Waters votes aye. Senator Bo Watson,
Watson votes aye.
Mayor Watson votes aye. I'm sorry, Senator Watson votes aye. Comptroller Justin Wilson, see you're here.
All right, Lauren Spires here for Comptroller Wilson. Vote aye.
Thank you, Lauren. Senator Ken Yeager.
Yeager votes aye.
Senator Yeager votes aye. Senator Jeff Yarbrough. That completes the roll. Calling of the roll.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Sorry.
That takes us, by my count, that motion passes for the acceptance of that final report. Thank you for the members that have joined us. I'm grateful that the quorum continues to increase, which allows us to successfully move to tab 5. And Dr. Lippert, I'll let you make the introductions for the local revenue and services report.
Very, very good, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Owen, if you could pass presentation to Mr. Mount. And while Michael is calling up his screen, this will be the local revenue and services report. This is the final, and this is the third and final report in that series. You've previously approved the interim reports, the first dealing with local revenue, I'm sorry, with the internet sales, and the second with education funding and revenue. And now Michael will bring it home with this final report. You received the draft of this. You reviewed the draft of this at our last meeting. Michael?
All right, thank you. Chairman, Commissioners, my name is Michael Mount, and I'll be presenting our report on local revenue and services behind tab 5. This report is submitted for your approval. This is the third and final report of the Commission's comprehensive study of the revenue sources of counties and cities in Tennessee and the services counties and cities provide. The report has been updated based on members' comments at the last meeting. Members requested that more information regarding Public Chapter 856, Acts of 2002, be added to the front part of the report. This addition, which follows, can be found on pages 8 and 9 of the report. Let's see. The percentage of each of state shared taxes revenues that the state must share with local governments is set in state law, and local government state shared tax revenue as a percentage of total state tax revenue has varied over time, in part because of changes in state law. To help balance the state's budget in 2002, the General Assembly increased tax rates for alcoholic beverage, beer, business, cigarette, coin-operated amusement, excise, professional privileges, sales, vending machine sales, and wholesale tobacco taxes. And none of the additional revenues from the increases were shared with local governments. Rather than increase the $1,600 single article cap on the local option sales tax, the General Assembly enacted the state single article tax on the value of sales between $1,600 and $3,200 at a rate of 2.75%, which was $56.9 million in state revenue in fiscal year 2016-17. Following the 2002 changes, state shared tax revenue as a percentage of total state tax revenue decreased from 8.4% to 7.5% and has not again reached its 2002 level. Some local officials have raised budgetary and fairness concerns resulting from the 2002 increases not being shared, saying that counties and cities also need additional revenue. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mount, for that report on the report. Again, this is the third and final, so a vote will need to be taken today. Prior to that, are there any comments or questions or concerns from members of the commission?
This is Jill Holland, and I would just like to commend you on the report. It was a great report, and I think it's something that really needs to be considered by the commission to return these funds to the counties and the cities.
I may vote no on this one. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Holland, for those comments. I thought I heard a secondary comment. The floor is still open. Just for everyone's reminder, we are being recorded on this Zoom call for legal notice. But I'm also happy to, at this time, if there are no further questions, comments, or concern, to entertain a motion for the acceptance of this final report.
Mayor Frank moves to accept.
Mayor Bickers will second.
Thank you. That's a proper motion, properly seconded by Mayor Frank, seconded by Mayor Bickers. If there are no other comments, questions, or concern, I will ask the Madam Clerk to please call the roll.
I'll call the roll for tab 5, local revenue. Mayor Anderson, how do you vote? Commissioner Arnold, how do you vote?
Arnold votes aye.
Commissioner Arnold votes aye. Mayor Bickers?
Aye.
Mayor Bickers votes aye. Mayor Bradshaw?
Bradshaw votes aye.
Mayor Bradshaw votes aye. Mayor Brooks?
Brooks votes aye.
Mayor Brooks votes aye. Representative Carter? Mr. Clifton?
Clifton votes aye.
Mr. Clifton votes aye. Representative Crawford?
Aye.
Representative Crawford votes aye. Commissioner Davis?
Aye.
Commissioner Davis votes aye. County Clerk Gaither?
Gaither votes aye.
County Clerk Gaither votes aye. Mayor Frank?
Aye.
Mayor Frank votes aye. Mayor Holland?
Aye.
Mayor Holland votes aye. County Executive Jeff Huffman? Senator Lundberg? Representative Lynn? Representative Love?
Aye.
Representative Love votes aye. Mayor McDonald? Representative Parkinson? Mr. Peach?
Aye.
Mr. Peach votes aye. Senator Robinson? Mayor Waters?
Aye.
Mayor Waters votes aye. Senator Watson?
Senator Watson votes aye.
Comptroller Wilson?
Aye.
Comptroller Wilson votes aye. Lawrence Byers, thank you. Senator Yeager?
Yeager votes aye.
Senator Yeager votes aye. Senator Yarborough? That concludes the vote.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Ayes have it.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. That was my record as well. The ayes have it. I am thankful for the members of the commission on that vote. It now takes us, according to the agenda, to item tab 6, which is the right to shop. Dr. Lippert, I'll let you make the introductions.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Michael, if you'll go ahead and pass control of the presentation to Ms. Berry, Jennifer will go ahead and present tab 6, which is our final report on the right to shop, which is an insurance cost, a medical procedure cost transparency, actually law, which the report analyzes and provides additional information on. Sorry about that. Jennifer will hopefully be able to do this without stumbling through the description of it like I just did. So I'm going to let Jennifer take over before I say anything else.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. I am Jennifer Berry, and I am presenting the final report addressing cost savings of right to shop programs for your approval. We prepared the report in response to Public Chapter 407, Acts of 2019, Tennessee's Right to Shop law, which directs the Commission to perform a study of any cost savings realized by enrollees with health plans in other states that have adopted incentive program legislation or incentive programs that reward enrollees for shopping and choosing lower cost healthcare service providers. The study is to include cost savings resulting from programs offered by both private health plans and state employee health plans, and at a minimum to look at programs in Arizona, Florida, Kentucky, Maine, and New Hampshire. To address questions and concerns expressed by members at the November meeting, we made a few revisions to the draft report, which are highlighted yellow in the report. On pages 3 and 4, we added that when making decisions about insurance plans and healthcare needs, whether they have insurance or not, consumers can get assistance and information from the Federal Marketplace website, which is healthcare.gov. And people with insurance can also get help and resources from their insurer. On pages 4 and 5, there's some additional information about the cost and challenges for states when implementing public cost websites, and some new language emphasizing that healthcare is not a commodity and quality is as important as cost. And finally, on page 7, we added more detail about participation rates in other states' employee health plan incentive programs. The findings of the report, which are on page 3, remain the same, with the exception of one additional sentence highlighting the importance of consumer education and promotion of the tools. To summarize, the final report has found that shopping for healthcare services can result in some savings for consumers and insurers, and when price tools are combined with incentive programs, they have the potential to save more. But usage for the tools and incentive programs varies widely. A few states have implemented incentive programs for state or other government employee health plans, or have required private plans to implement them. During interviews with Commission staff, stakeholders emphasized the importance of educating consumers about healthcare and promoting the tools to encourage their use. And the data show that the programs do produce cost savings, but there's not yet enough data to determine whether the savings are significant over the long term. And thank you very much. That's my presentation. I'm happy to answer your questions, and I request your approval of this final report.
Thank you, Ms. Berry, for that report and update on this final approval for the Public Chapter 407 Acts of 2019 Right to Shop. We will now, prior to the vote, open the floor for commission members. If there are any questions or comments or concerns about the report from Ms. Berry. The floor is open. I see Chairman Crawford has a question, Chairman.
Yes, this is more of a point of order, Mr. Chairman. I tried to ask the question earlier. On the votes that we have taken so far, I've not heard any announcement of the votes, and so I am concerned if these votes are receiving the necessary amount for them to be passed. I don't want to sit here and waste our time. So I guess that's my question to the point of order. Can that be announced?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Crawford, for pointing that out. April, Madam Clerk, after the completion of the vote, if you could please give us the vote counts, ayes and nays, so we can also make sure that we have the proper quorum each time that we are voting. It's very.
Yes, sir. Yes,
thank
sir.
you. Very good point, Chairman Crawford. Thank you for that point of order. Are there any comments, questions, or concerns about the Right to Shop report that we are now under tab 6? Prior to me calling for a motion or second. We will entertain a motion to approve this final report.
I move to approve. This is Jill Holland.
Second.
I have a motion by Mayor Holland. It looks like a second. I did not see the name on the second.
Gaither.
Thank you. Motion by Holland, properly seconded by Gaither. That is a proper motion, properly seconded. If there are no further comments, questions, or concerns, Madam Clerk, I would ask you to call the vote, call the roll, as well as announce the vote totals at the conclusion. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Mayor Anderson?
Anderson, yes.
Mayor Anderson votes aye, or yes. Commissioner Arnold?
Aye.
Commissioner Arnold votes aye. Mayor Bickers?
Aye.
Mayor Bickers votes aye. Mayor Bradshaw?
Bradshaw votes aye.
Mayor Bradshaw votes aye. Mayor Brooks?
Brooks votes aye.
Mayor Brooks votes aye. Representative Carter? Mr. Clifton? Sorry, Mr. Clifton? Okay, here we go. Representative Crawford?
Aye.
Commissioner Davis?
Aye.
County Clerk Gaither? I'm sorry.
Gaither votes aye.
I'm sorry. Gaither votes aye and Davis votes aye. Mayor Frank?
Aye.
Mayor Frank votes aye. Mayor Holland?
Holland votes aye.
Mayor Holland votes aye. County Executive Jeff Huffman? Senator Lundberg? Representative Lynn? Representative Love?
Aye.
Representative Love votes aye. Mayor McDonald? Representative Parkinson? Mr. Peach?
Aye.
Mr. Peach votes aye. Senator Robinson? Mayor Waters?
Aye.
Mayor Waters votes aye. Senator Watson?
Senator Watson votes aye.
Senator Watson votes aye. Comptroller Wilson's representative?
Aye.
Lawrence Spires votes aye. Senator Yeager?
Yeager votes aye.
Senator Yeager votes aye. Senator Yarborough? I have 16 voting aye.
Yes, this is Clifton. I had a technical problem there momentarily. Clifton votes aye as well.
Okay. Mr. Clifton votes aye.
So 17 ayes and 0 nays.
17.
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lipper. 17 ayes and 0 nays.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Thank you also, Dr. Lippard. So 17 ayes, that is more than quorum. So that final report passes right to shop tab 6, which takes us to our next report, which is tab 7, multi-school system counties, Senate Joint Resolution 593. Dr. Lippard, I'll let you make proper introductions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So while Jennifer passes control of the screen to Emma Johnson, Ms. Johnson will be presenting this final report for your approval. This one has been a long time coming. And because it's been a while since you've seen the draft presentation, well, our local members have seen it a couple of times in subcommittee meetings, but the majority of the commission's not seen it in a while. Emma's going to go into a little bit more detail than we have on the last couple of final reports. With that said, Emma.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commission members. My name is Emma Johnson, and I'll be presenting the report on multi-school system counties, and it's being submitted for your approval. This report was prepared in response to Senate Joint Resolution 593 of the 110th General Assembly, sponsored by Senator Hale. The resolution directed TACIR to study the overall effects on public K-12 education of the laws relating to the sharing of resources among school systems in the same county. It further notes that the creation of new school districts has in the past created conflict regarding the ownership of existing school buildings and facilities. In response, this report also considers options for the transfer of school property to new school systems. Since the draft report was presented at the September 2019 Commission meeting, staff has added maps and tables showing school system by county, the number and type of school systems by county, and grades served by school systems. Staff has also added information about a proposed new school building in Jonesboro, additional information on Tennessee statutes and case law pertaining to building transfer issues, and clarifying language regarding student and taxpayer inequities. These changes are highlighted in the report. The report also contains revisions that clarify and update information regarding the mixed drink tax. Previous versions of the report included a recommendation to remove the expiration in state law on provisions that determine the distribution of mixed drink tax revenue in multi-system counties. When the law was amended in 2014 to reflect the current distribution formula, it included an expiration date since there was ongoing litigation surrounding the previous distribution. The 111th General Assembly removed this expiration, so we removed the mixed drink tax recommendation from the report as well. Following an October 2020 meeting of the Commission's Local Government Working Group, staff added language reiterating the need for a comprehensive review of the basic education program funding formula, and these changes are also highlighted in the report. The report makes two sets of recommendations which remain largely unchanged from the draft report. The first set of recommendations relates to revenue sharing requirements for existing school systems. And stakeholders acknowledge that a county's ability to use countywide revenue in lieu of bonds to fund education capital expenditures without sharing this revenue is arguably unfair to taxpayers living in city school systems or special school districts. But it's only one of a few ways that counties can address student equity under current law. Because countywide property taxes and countywide local option sales taxes apply to property in sales within cities and special school districts, the General Assembly could require these counties to share this revenue when they use it for education capital expenditures, as is required when they use it for education operations and maintenance. But if the state does so, it should consider adopting other alternatives that would improve student equity in counties with multiple school systems while adhering to principles of taxpayer equity. And any such change should be prospective so that it does not create problems with revenues committed to the repayment of existing debt or with maintenance of effort requirements. One alternative that could improve both student and taxpayer equity is to remove the requirement that counties share their portion of the unearmarked half of local option sales tax when it is budgeted for education operations and maintenance. Because this revenue is distributed based on the location of the sale, none of it is generated within cities. Another alternative that would decrease disparities for students and taxpayers is to transition from calculating fiscal capacity at the county level to calculating it at the system level. A system level model was recommended in the early 2000s by the Task Force on Teacher Pay and by the BEP Review Committee. An updated version of the prototype system level model developed by TACIR and comptroller staff in 2004 was used to calculate BEP revenue estimates in the report, but other system level models could be developed by the Commission or other entities. And the following two recommendations aim to improve the process for transferring school property from counties to newly formed school systems. Because of the uncertainty surrounding this issue, the General Assembly should establish a method for transferring real and personal school property to new school systems formed by existing cities. A local committee could be created to determine what property should be transferred and what the city should pay for it. But whoever determines the city's liability should consider past and future contributions of the city and the county for the property. Relevant unit costs in the BEP could be used to calculate the value of new real personal property subject to transfer. For instance, textbook unit costs are based on the actual cost of textbooks that will be purchased for the upcoming school year. Also, to ensure that residents voting in the referendum to form a new school system know what it will cost to acquire all of the property it will need to operate a school system, the General Assembly should require that the purchase price of the property be determined before the city referendum on the creation of the city school system. And this report, along with the report in TACIR's Local Revenue and Services series, is designed to form a foundation for further work by a task force of stakeholders to develop a set of specific legislative proposals for consideration by the Governor and the General Assembly. Such a task force should include representatives of those affected by the changes, as as well as those with responsibility for adopting and implementing them. And with that, I would ask for approval of the report, but I'm first happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Johnson, for that report. I'm also happy to open the floor for any comments, questions, or concerns from members of the commission prior to taking a vote. Seeing none and hearing none, we will now entertain a motion for acceptance of this final report for multi-school system counties. Is there a motion?
Mayor Bickers will move for its adoption.
Thank you, Mayor.
Frank seconds.
Thank you, Mayor Bickers, for that motion, properly seconded by Mayor Frank. If there are any other comments, questions, or concerns prior to the vote? Hearing none, Madam Clerk, if you would please call the roll and announce the vote count at the conclusion. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I'll call the roll for the multi-school systems report. Beginning with Mayor Anderson, how would you vote?
Anderson, aye.
Anderson votes aye. Commissioner Arnold?
Aye.
Commissioner Arnold votes aye. Mayor Bickers?
Aye.
Mayor Bickers votes aye. Mayor Bradshaw?
Bradshaw votes aye.
Mayor Bradshaw votes aye. Mayor Brooks?
Brooks votes aye.
Mayor Brooks votes aye. Representative Carter? Mr. Clifton?
Clifton votes aye.
Mr. Clifton votes aye. Representative Crawford?
Crawford votes aye.
Representative Crawford votes aye. Commissioner Davis?
Aye.
Commissioner Davis votes aye. County Clerk Gaither?
Gaither votes aye.
County Clerk Gaither votes aye. Mayor Frank?
Aye.
Mayor Frank votes aye. Mayor Holland?
Aye.
Mayor Holland votes aye. County Executive Huffman? Representative Love? Senator Lundberg?
Aye. Sorry about that. Couldn't get my
Oh,
microphone on.
oh, thank you, sir. Representative Love votes aye. Senator Lundberg? Representative Lynn? Mayor McDonald? Representative Parkinson?
Parkinson pass.
Mr. Peach?
Aye.
Senator Robinson? Mayor Waters?
Aye.
Mayor Waters votes aye. Senator Watson?
Senator Watson votes aye.
Senator Watson votes aye. Comptroller Wilson?
Lauren Spires for Comptroller Wilson votes aye.
Lauren Spires votes aye. Senator Yeager?
Yeager votes aye.
Senator Yeager votes aye. Senator Yarborough? Representative Parkinson, for clarification, is that a nay?
That's a pass. Abstain.
Okay. I have 17 ayes and 1 pass.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. That motion and vote passes for the acceptance of the final report for the multi-school system counties. Just for the record, I have confirmed that the quorum number needed for acceptance of these final reports is 13. And so far we have exceeded 13 on all votes today. So thank you all for that. Dr. Lippard, we could continue going to tab 8, which is not requiring a vote, but I'm not sure if I understand the length of what the TVA payments in lieu of taxes update, how long that would be, or should we go back to our final report under tab 3
So, Mr. Chairman, the tab 8, the presentation is a little longer than the final report presentations, but certainly not as long as tab 3. And Mr. Morio is currently on, but he's been having some technical difficulties. So we may want to go ahead and get his presentation out of the way first and then go back to tab 3.
Yeah, Cliff, I think I'm good to go if everyone can hear me.
Okay. Yeah, we can hear you fine, Bob. So if Emma, if you could go ahead and pass control to Bob, please. That's okay with you, Mr. Chairman?
Certainly, without objection from the commission. That's not a problem. I don't see any objection on the screens that I'm looking at.
All right. All right, looks like we got the memo up on the screen.
Good to go,
okay.
Bob.
All right, well, thank you, Cliff. Thank you. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Bob Morio, and I'll be presenting this brief update on some of the issues regarding the TVA payments in lieu of taxes and how the payments to state and local governments in Tennessee are being affected. So in January 2020, when the Commission published our annual report on payments in lieu of taxes, we identified 2 developing issues that staff would monitor throughout the year. We issued an update memo for the Commission September meeting, and today I wanted to discuss the new information we've gathered since then and answer any questions you may have before the draft the report is the updated report is presented in January. So the first of these 2 issues was the status of TVA's long-term wholesale power contracts with the local power companies, Lpcs. Historically, Lpcs have operated under power purchase contracts with TVA subject to termination notice requirements of 5, 10, or 20 years, where if a local power company wants to purchase power from another provider, it was contractually obligated to give TVA that multi-year termination period. And so in August of 2019, TVA began to offer the Lpcs new 20-year long-term contracts it calls partnership agreements, which include a 3.1% bill credit in exchange for the certainty of the 20-year commitment. And at the time of the January report, we noted 131 of TVA's 154 Lpcs had signed those contracts, and this updated number is now 142. Partnership credits were valued at $163 million in TVA's 2020 fiscal year, which reduces the potential overall pilot by $8.1 million because of the 5% calculation of revenue from sales of electricity. 5% of that $163 million in credits is $8.1 million less for the overall pilot to all states. And based on TVA's projected revenue for fiscal year 2021, those credits could total between $190 to $200 million and more if additional Lpcs sign on. And the January report noted that if all the providers were signed up to the new agreement, that the revenue would decrease by $225 million estimated for a full federal fiscal year, which reduces the total pilot to all states by over $11 million. And with Tennessee historically receiving about 2/3 of the total pilot, that would mean the state would be getting about $7.5 million less than it would have without the credit. The trade-off being is that our local power companies are saving as much as $150 million on the cost of buying electricity, which 2/3 of that $225 million in credits is money staying with those Lpcs. So the 142 who have signed these new partnership agreements are responsible for 75% of TVA's total operating revenue and 81.5% of its revenue from sales of power in the federal fiscal year 2020, which brings me to the second topic mentioned in the January report, that TVA's largest distributor, Memphis Light, Gas, and Water, MLGW, is studying whether to leave the TVA system. MLGW currently has a 5-year termination contract with TVA. And so the update we presented in September explains steps MLGW has taken in 2020 so far towards reaching a decision. At that time, MLGW was seeking proposals from consultants to help it issue additional RFPs necessary to obtain firm bids from companies that would want to build the necessary infrastructure and sell power to MLGW. So in September, MLGW's board recommended a $520,000 proposal from GDS Consultants, Stanley Consultants, that would have MLGW issue 3 concurrent RFPs, seeking bids for transmission components, new thermal generation, because the additional power plant supply would be necessary, and one for power purchase agreements and renewable energy resources. Overall, MLGW and GDS said it would take 12 to 18 months to issue, receive, and evaluate those bids and decide what course of action ultimately to take. Because of the size of this contract, MLGW needs approval from Memphis City Council to move forward with GDS. However, some members of the City Council questioned the cost and lengthy timeline proposed, and we're offering an alternative to spend $150,000 for different consultants called ACES to issue an RFP for power bids that they say would take 3 to 6 months. MLGW explained that this resolution that Council had previously approved wasn't comprehensive enough to meet their needs that would, in order for them to make what they believe is a decision. And they noted that GDS and Stanley submitted a complete proposal that was evaluated as part of their process before they ultimately decided. ACES submitted a full proposal that was considered before the board decided to work with GDS and Stanley. So then at the October 6th Memphis City Council meeting, the council voted to reject the GDS contract. Following this rejection, when the MLGW Board of Commissioners met in November, there was discussion regarding what options it could pursue in-house to issue its RFPs, including the possibility of hiring additional staff, purchasing software, or changes in the scope of the contract that would allow it to take some steps forward without the council approval. And so at this time, next steps are uncertain. They seem to be in a sort of a holding pattern, trying to see what they can do next. If MLGW finds a way to move towards the bidding process for power outside TVA, it still seems likely it would be 12 to 18 months before that decision could be made. If MLGW is able to obtain bids and decides sometime in 2022 that it will leave TVA, only then would the 5-year contract termination period potentially begin. And so working with that possible timeline, federal fiscal year ending September 2028 would be when TVA would stop seeing revenue from sales to MLGW. And the pilot would then be reduced starting in October 2028 into the year 2029. So that's sort of the timeline of when you're looking at if this were to happen, when those revenues would be reduced. If eliminating MLGW's revenue from the calculation of TVA's pilot to the state could reduce the total pilot by nearly $50 million. And Tennessee's share of TVA's power sales would drop from 67% to 63%, meaning that we would estimate Tennessee's pilot could be reduced by nearly $42 million in that situation. Other states in the TVA region would also receive less money because of the loss of revenue from MLGW. So the January report and our subsequent updates have explained that there are some existing provisions in Tennessee law, notably Public Chapter 1035, Act of 2010, in Tennessee Code Annotated 67-43101, that could recoup some of that money. It says that entities other than TVA selling wholesale electric power to local power companies are required to make pilots to the state. But the actual amounts will ultimately depend on how MLGW and its new suppliers structure their contracts, where they locate any new power facilities, who owns them. There's a number of factors that would determine pilot amounts. Regarding whether local governments in the MLGW service area would receive pilot money through the state's distribution formula, as we said in the January report, these equivalent payments made pursuant to the 2010 law would be added to the TVA pilot revenue and allocated to local governments through the state's TVA pilot distribution formula. But the local governments whose distributors leave TVA's service area, those being served by MLGW, are excluded from the portions of revenue distributed back through the formula based on population, county acreage, and TVA acreage, which is ultimately the majority of that money. There are direct tax equivalent payments that TVA makes to counties for property TVA owns. Those include assets that it would retain in Shelby County. Those payments would not be affected by an LGW leaving TVA. And then base payments that currently go to Shelby County and the city of Memphis would remain, but the additional amounts distributed through everybody, the rest of those local governments would not be receiving those. And that's based on advice we were discussing with the Tennessee Department of Revenue to confirm we're reading that correctly. So in addition to those two developing issues, Tennessee and the Valley region have been dealing with the spread of COVID-19 since March. And although many businesses have reopened and resumed operations, decreased demand for electricity is still affecting TVA revenue. For the federal fiscal year that ended September 30th, TVA reported just under $10 billion in revenue from sales of electricity to its local power companies and direct industrial customers, which is more than $1 billion less than federal fiscal year 2019. So as a result, TVA's estimated pilot amount for the all states in federal fiscal year 2021, which is began in April, will be approximately $500 million, a decrease of more than $50 million overall. Tennessee's share is projected to be about approximately $340 million, which is nearly $33 million less than the previous year. The state began receiving those lower payments from TVA in October, which are approximately 9% lower than last year, and will continue to do so through the end of the state's fiscal year 2021 in June and into the first part of state fiscal year 2022. TVA's revenue from the current federal fiscal year 2021 through September 2021 will determine the pilot payments beyond that. And in August 2020, TVA's board approved a $200 million pandemic relief credit that will apply to the LPCs, large commercial and industrial customers, and that's a 2.5% monthly base rate credit that will extend throughout this year. And so the combination of that credit and the slowly recovering economy, TVA's projected revenue for fiscal year 2021 is going to remain slightly below or even to this past fiscal year, which means that the pilot payments will be receiving in 2021 and 22 and continue to be similar to what we're seeing today. So with that, I wish you all good health, happy holidays. We will have the fully updated annual report for you in January, and I'm open to questions you may have at this time.
Mr. Mario, thank you very much for that great update on the pilot programs from TVA. I'd be happy to open the floor to any members of the commission that have questions or comments for Mr. Mario while he's still with us.
I have one question.
Mayor Franks,
yes. The reference to TCA 67433101, is that something that basically that would just be an interpretation of the Department of Revenue, or is it something that would need legislative clarification? If you could talk a little bit about that, if Memphis ended up going down that path.
I think, thank you for the question. It was a section of code that was written for a slightly different situation. When TVA was leasing a power facility in Mississippi and buying that power back, there was some question over how that arrangement was going to affect the pilot. So it was set up that purchasing power from that third-party entity back into the system would require that company to make the same pilot payments that it would if it were just generated by TVA. So it hasn't been, no one has left the TVA system to apply it in this situation. So it certainly there's a possibility that there would be questions, but it was our understanding, our reading it, and our consultation with the Department of Revenue that we're reading it correctly, and that's how they would interpret it to distribute the payments according to their to the law. So they're the ones that TVA sends the money to revenue, and revenue distributes it based on the formulas. So that's their understanding of how they would distribute it.
Thank you, Mayor Franks, for that question, and Mr. Morio for that answer. Any other comments or questions from the commission prior to moving back to tab 3?
Mr. Chair, this is Representative Parkinson. I got just a quick question, just a question
Yes,
of clarity.
you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to know what questions are we trying to answer with this report specifically?
The overall purpose of the report is to monitor things that may affect the pilot payments and how that money is going to come to Tennessee, how it's going to go out to the state and local governments. So, in the past, it's just been anything that's going to affect that pilot amount, whether it's new power plants closing, changes in rate structures. So really our perspective, looking at this issue is that there's a potential somebody's going to leave and reduce TVA's revenue, which would have an effect on the pilot and how that money, because ultimately, I guess, this report's been going on for many years, and I'm always told that it's noted that, this pilot money is subject to change. It's not guaranteed to stay. It's not guaranteed to go up. So giving as much notice in advance of anything that's going to affect it is really what we're trying to do. Keep everybody aware and abreast of situations like this.
Mr. Chairman, if I could add something.
Certainly.
And I would just add, by way of clarification, that the presentation that Bob gave today is just an update on issues that we spoke of in our final report last year. The commission had asked us to come back with updated information as it became available, because this was still a developing situation at that time. And that's the purpose of the update today. But as Bob said, the report, which we'll be presenting next month, our annual report, is our statutorily required report on potential factors that could potentially affect payments received by the state and local governments in Tennessee from TVA payments in lieu of taxes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Director.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you, Dr. Lippard, for that clarification. And Mr. Mario, thank you for that presentation for the pilot program. Without objection from members of the commission, that would take us back to tab 3, where we began some time ago, which is Public Chapter 228, Acts of 2017, and Dr. Matthew Owen. Dr. Lippard, do you have any other thoughts? This is a draft, not for a final vote. That will come in January, but any final thoughts, Dr. Lippard, before we turn it back over to Dr. Owen?
The only thing I would say, Mr. Chairman, and Bob, if you pass that to Zent, while Bob passes the control back to Matt, just a reminder to the commission members that the draft report that Dr. Owen's presenting today is a statutorily required follow-up report to the Broadband Act that Governor Haslam passed back and the General Assembly passed back in 2017. And a reminder that report included a number of recommendations that you, as the commission, developed in our 2017 report. So a lot of the information that Matt's going to be going over today, to include some updated recommendations, originated with this commission and then were adopted by the Haslam administration and his broadband plan that was ultimately passed by the General Assembly.
Thank you, Dr. Lippard. Dr. Owen, look forward to your report.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members. Thank you, Dr. Lippard. So as Cliff mentioned, I will be presenting the draft of the Commission's update to its 2017 broadband report for your review and comment. You can find copies of the draft report, its associated appendices, and the memo for the report in the materials for tab 3. And this is just a brief overview of sort of what Dr. Lippert was mentioning. So recognizing broadband's importance, the Commission in 2015 initiated a study of broadband access and adoption in Tennessee that culminated in its 2017 report. That report identified existing public and private sector initiatives for expanding coverage and increasing broadband adoption in the state. It also made several recommendations which emphasized opportunities for the government to work with the private sector, both for-profit and nonprofit, to fill remaining coverage and adoption gaps in the manner least costly to taxpayers without expanding the role of government. And as Cliff mentioned, these recommendations helped guide policy changes included in Public Chapter 228, Acts of 2017, the Tennessee Broadband Accessibility Act, which, consistent with the Commission's recommendations, established a state grant program to help offset the cost of expanding coverage in unserved areas, while also authorizing that program to grant funds to libraries to help facilitate broadband adoption. It established a tax credit that has since been repealed for broadband investment in Tier 3 and Tier 4 enhancement counties. It removed barriers to entry for would-be providers by authorizing electric cooperatives to provide broadband within their electric service areas. And it established a pathway for communities to signal providers that they have streamlined local permitting processes and removed regulatory barriers to broadband investment by being designated as broadband-ready communities. Today's draft report is prepared in response to the Act, which, as Cliff mentioned, also directed the Commission to update its 2017 broadband report by January 15th, 2021. And you can find copies of the Act and the materials in Appendix A. The overall body of evidence continues to support the conclusion that broadband remains a critical enabler without which communities and individuals risk being left behind. And awareness of broadband's importance has only been heightened by the COVID-19 pandemic as more people try to navigate working and learning from home. So for my presentation today, I'm going to focus first on the trends in access and adoption that we have seen before discussing the 4 draft recommendations that are included in the report. So as we assess broadband, or when we assess broadband access and adoption in the report, the draft is relying on data that is reported by broadband providers to the Federal Communications Commission. This is the same same data source that we used for the 2017 report. And I will note just at the outset for this part of the presentation that the same criticisms of the FCC data that were true at that time are also true now. So specifically, the coverage data that is reported to the FCC is reported at the census block level rather than for individual addresses. And so if even one location in a census block has access to broadband, the entire census block is reported as being served. As a result, the FCC data represent the maximum extent of coverage at the time that they were reported. And that gets into the second potential issue with the FCC data, is that there's a lag between when they are reported to the FCC and when they become publicly available. So the data that we are using for this report were reported, generally speaking, either in December 2019 or in December 2018. And as a result of that, they might not fully capture the effects of the policy changes that were included in the 2017 Act. We're continuing to use these data, in particular because they do provide a comprehensive data set for Tennessee that allows us to assess change over time and allows us to compare changes in Tennessee with changes in other states. And so with all that in mind, what the data show is that broadband access has increased in Tennessee since when we presented the 2017 report. So FCC defines broadband as internet service with a minimum capacity of 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload. As of December 2019, approximately 93.7% of Tennesseans lived in census blocks where at least one provider reported offering wireline or fixed wireless service with a capacity of 25.3 or greater. And this is compared to 88.3% in the December 2015 data set, which was the data set that we used for our 2017 report. I will note that, and let me change my screen here, is that you can find, we have included a map of the coverage data for Tennessee as map 1 on page 25 in the report. I realize that that map at the state level does not necessarily provide as a good showing of what is available in local communities. So what staff are intent on doing is including development district level maps as an appendix in the final report that will hopefully give a better sense of where coverage is in certain areas of the state. Regarding coverage in rural areas, the data also show increases since our last report, although I will say that coverage in rural areas still lags behind coverage in urban areas. And the data, similar to access, the data also show increases in adoption. So according to the FCC's 2020 broadband deployment report, which relies on December 2018 data from providers, 58% of households located in census blocks where providers reported 25.3 service are subscribing to that service, and that's as of December 2018. This is an increase from 40% as of December 2014, which was the data we used for broadband adoption in the 2017 report. So although gaps remain, the increases in access and adoption are encouraging, and the good news is that Tennessee is well placed to address these gaps based on the public and private sector initiatives that are already in place. And I'm going to pause there briefly if there are any questions or comments or clarifications needed regarding the data on access and adoption before moving into my presentation on the recommendations. I think I said Representative Crawford.
Yes, the only thing I would ask is that's pretty small, and I don't ever remember seeing that. You may have sent it to us, but can I get a copy of that emailed to me so I could enlarge it and see it a little better?
Yes, the copy of the map. Are you talking about map 1, sir?
Yes.
Yes. Let's see. You would like that during the meeting, Cliff? I don't know if somebody can email that to Representative Crawford currently, but I'll make sure you get one at least after the meeting, sir, so you can get a
Okay,
copy.
I've got my strongest glasses on and I still can't see it, so I know I'm old, but
well,
I appreciate it.
And that's part of the reason that, and I apologize if these were not ready for the draft report today, but that's why staff's intent is to produce development district level maps. This is just as we did for the 2017 report. And hopefully those maps will sort of provide a more focused picture of coverage in subsections of the state. It'll be a little bit easier to see where those lines are, at least according to the FCC data. So I do apologize that those weren't ready today. If there are no further issues regarding the coverage data or no further clarifications regarding that map, moving on to our discussion of broadband adoption and the recommendation related to that, we do have one recommendation that is located on, let me get that open, page 8, page 8 in our draft report. So the barriers to broadband adoption remain similar to those that we discussed in the 2017 report. Barriers, of course, include a lack of access, but other commonly reported barriers in surveys of people nationwide include the cost of broadband, both including the cost of service and the cost of devices. And aside from cost, those concerns or those barriers also include a lack of interest or a lack of need, lack of reported need. So given the differing barriers that individuals face, and these barriers do tend to vary for different demographic groups, the Commission found in its 2017 report that there is no single broadband adoption program that will work for every community. In terms of the resources that are available to overcome these barriers, many of those that were described in the 2017 report remain available today, and this includes discounts for service that are offered by providers, as well as through federal programs, including the E-rate program for schools and libraries, as well as the Lifeline program for residential households, discounts for devices, and digital literacy training opportunities provided by a host of private sector entities. The Department of Economic and Community Development provides links on its website to several broadband adoption resources that provide information on low-cost service and low-cost device options, as well as information to help communities develop adoption strategies that fit their needs. And the draft report and its recommendation focuses specifically on local libraries and schools and their continuing efforts to help the communities that they serve get online. So in terms of libraries, libraries have had success offering digital literacy training courses, and they are encouraged by the Tennessee State Library and Archives to provide classes several times a year, depending on their size. The feedback that they've received from these classes has been positive, with well over 80% of participants reporting increased confidence in using the information that they have learned. Libraries are also addressing affordability and coverage gaps in their communities by lending wireless hotspot devices that allow people to access mobile wireless service. Now, although these hotspots are not long-term substitutes for home broadband, they are a short-term solution for providing internet access when people most need it. For example, if they have school projects that need to be completed or when they're applying for jobs. The devices remain very popular, and libraries report that wait lists are common. Now, regarding the efforts of Tennessee's K-12 schools, many of these efforts, of course, predate the COVID-19 pandemic, but the pandemic certainly has heightened public awareness of broadband's importance, particularly in education, as well as the role that schools can play in facilitating adoption for their communities. For some schools, this has meant ensuring that students that need devices have access to laptops or tablets that can be taken home to be used for schoolwork. And similar to the state's libraries, we know that some systems have also obtained hotspots that can be sent home with students who live in areas without access to wireline broadband service or whose families cannot support it. And I will note that when we do talk with some school systems, this has not been a solution for all of them. And this is in part because some have found that they have many areas in their communities where even mobile wireless service is not available. And I think that underlines that there is simply no one-size-fits-all strategy when it comes to addressing broadband adoption. But with that in mind, what we've seen in recent years is that additional federal, state, and local funding for library and schools is helping to support their broadband efforts in Tennessee, or their broadband adoption efforts in Tennessee. Consistent with the Commission's 2017 recommendations, the state's broadband grant program has awarded grants for a combined total of $443,500 to libraries in 54 of the state's 95 counties. So far, these grants have helped libraries provide more than 1,500 digital literacy classes to 10,534 participants, and they have also funded more than 200 hotspots at these libraries. The State Library and Archives also received approximately $600,000 in federal funding from the state's share of the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, the CARES Act. That was this year, which the State Library and Archives has used to fund grants for hotspots, computers, and video conferencing equipment. For schools, the CARES Act funding has also been made available for laptops and hotspots, as well as other technology-related uses, including one-to-one technology initiatives. And we do know that at least one school system has partnered with local governments, businesses, and nonprofit organizations in its community to pay for home broadband service for families with students eligible for free and reduced lunch in its district. This program is helping to bring broadband access to 28,500 students at a cost of around $8 million over 10 years, according to reports. Because of the role that libraries and schools play in their communities and the importance of tailoring broadband adoption efforts to meet local needs, the draft report recommends that state and local governments should continue to identify opportunities to increase funding for libraries and schools, to assist their efforts to facilitate broadband adoption and short-term access in their communities, including support for digital literacy classes, devices, hotspots, and other efforts to make broadband available to those who either don't have or cannot afford service. And in particular, for libraries, the draft report recommends that the state should continue to provide funding for broadband adoption efforts through the state's broadband grant program. Before moving on to our recommendations related to broadband access, I'll pause there if there are questions related to broadband adoption or that particular recommendation.
I have a question.
Yes.
Or actually a statement.
Okay.
Chair. I just wanted to make a note to let everyone know that we currently have 6 buses. This is Tipton County that are parked in various locations across the county that we provide hotspots that are being used for the students.
Thank you. Thank you for that information. We can actually include that information in the report. We have heard of several other districts that are attempting to do something similar, and we've seen that highlighted in other states as a solution. So thank you, County Clerk Gaither. Thank you.
Thank you, County Clerk Gaither, for that comment. And Dr. Owen, just to add to that same thought process here in the city of Cleveland, City Councilman Ken Webb has championed the providing for services to the students who are now, the schools are closed, and our Cleveland City School parking lots have been outfitted with Wi-Fi, as have the Cleveland Chamber of Commerce parking lot, to try to give these parents opportunities if they don't have the ability to have Wi-Fi at home, which we do have a significant amount still here in the city of Cleveland, the opportunity for them to at least drive to the parking lot of their Cleveland City School or the Chamber of Commerce to be able to do their assignments during the school closures for COVID. So more anecdotal information for you.
Oh, thank you. That certainly supports what we've heard from broadband providers who we've spoken with, who said that they see similar things in their parking lots for those that have put up Wi-Fi access points for the community there, that they are commonly used. They are well used, particularly during the pandemic. So transitioning to our 3 recommendations related to broadband access. When it comes to the barriers to expanding access, the challenging economics of providing broadband in some unserved areas remains no less a problem today than it was at the time of the 2017 report. Policies intended to promote coverage expansions by reducing the cost to providers of broadband deployment were included in the Commission's 2017 report. And consistent with these recommendations, Public Chapter 228 Acts of 2017 established, as I noted above, established the Broadband Ready Communities designation for local governments. It established a franchise and excise tax for providers, and a franchise excise tax credit, excuse me, for providers. And it established a state grant program for broadband projects in unserved areas. So first, briefly on the Broadband Ready Communities designation and the tax credit, and let me change my map on the screen here. The Broadband Ready Communities designation for local governments that adopt a specific or a specified set of policies, they can apply to the Department of Economic and Community Development to be designated as Broadband Ready Communities. So far, or currently I should say, there are 58 local governments in Tennessee that have received this designation. That includes 9 cities and 49 counties. And that map that I put on the screen, you can see on page 57 of the draft report. Although this designation is intended to signal providers that these communities have removed regulatory barriers and streamlined their processes to help promote broadband expansion, TACIR staff have not found any examples where the designation was a deciding factor for a provider's decision to expand coverage. Regarding the tax credit, that tax credit allowed providers to claim a credit against their franchise and excise taxes equal to 6% of the purchase price of broadband equipment for providing service in Tier 3 and Tier 4 enhancement counties. While that credit was available, it was underutilized. Although the credits were capped annually at $5 million combined for all providers statewide, only $2 million in credits were taken the year before it was repealed. And no providers who we interviewed as a part of our update advocated for reinstating the credit. While that tax credit has been repealed, and while the Broadband Ready Community designation does not appear to have had much, if any, effect on providers' deployment decisions in Tennessee, the Broadband Accessibility Grant Program, which is administered by ECD, is helping to accelerate coverage expansions. That program awards funding to providers to offset the cost of expanding broadband in unserved areas through a competitive application process. And through the first 3 rounds of that program, It has awarded a total of more than $44 million in grants to help fund 39 projects across the state, and you can find a map of those projects by round on page 31 in the report. Because ECD limits the grants to no more than 50% of overall costs for each project, more than $44 million in matching funds will also be invested in these projects, resulting in a total investment in broadband expansion of $88.7 million, public and private. There's also approximately $15 million in state funding available for projects in the fourth round of the grant, which is currently ongoing and is planning to award grants in 2021. One aspect of the grant program that I want to draw your attention to is the build-out requirements that are included in the program. So each grant includes a requirement for the recipient to expand coverage to the unserved homes and businesses in its project area. Providers must meet these requirements to receive their full grant awards, and funds are dispersed to grantees only as reimbursable project costs are incurred. ECD withholds 15% of the total grant amount for each project until the project is certified as complete by a licensed engineer or an ECD approved consultant who verifies that all obligations, including the build-out requirements, have been met. As a result, these requirements help to ensure that state funding spent through the program is resulting in coverage expansions. And through the first three rounds, those requirements, if fully met, would total 26,300 homes and businesses that were previously unserved. Now, in addition to this funding through the state broadband grant program, there's a sizable amount of federal funding through a variety of programs that is also helping to accelerate coverage expansions in Tennessee. This includes 62 projects that were awarded a total of $61 million in 2020 from the state's share of the CARES Act. It also includes funding that was just awarded on December 7th through the FCC's Rural Digital Opportunity Fund auction, which will provide the 11 winning bidders in Tennessee a combined total of $149 million over 10 years. So how much is left? I will draw your attention. We've included some TACIR staff estimates for this. These are rough estimates on page 44. And as you're looking at this table, what I'd like you to think, just keep in mind, is that because of the lag that's in the FCC data in terms of when it's reported and when it becomes available, and because of the lack of information that we were able to obtain on the exact boundaries for each project area awarded funding through the federal programs that we found for the report, TACIR staff are unable to calculate the exact number of housing units remaining after accounting for projects that have received funding through the state and federal programs. And I would also note that the estimates that are currently in the table in the draft report do not account for the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund auction that I just mentioned from the FCC. It is our hope that we will be able to include that information from that auction in our estimates, and we'll revise those estimates hopefully for the January report. So keeping those things in mind, as we show on the table, TACIR staff estimate that there are at least 131,000 homes and census blocks where no provider reported 25/3 service as of December 2019 that will not receive broadband from the existing state or federally funded projects that we've found. We've also provided several estimates on the cost to serve these homes based on the cost per location for projects in the first three rounds of the state grant program. I think the takeaway from this discussion is that while we don't have an exact number of the homes or the cost to serve them, the challenging economics of providing broadband in some unserved areas means that filling the remaining coverage gaps will likely require a combination of public and private resources. As a result, and as a result of the early results from the state's grant program, the draft report recommends that the state should keep supporting efforts to expand broadband access in Tennessee by continuing to fund the broadband grant program, and it could consider increasing its annual appropriations to this program to accelerate broadband expansion to more unserved areas. The draft report does include a second draft recommendation related to government incentives for broadband expansion. In the course of our interviews for this project, several stakeholders raised the possibility of establishing other government incentives for broadband providers. For example, under one of these proposals, the state would authorize local governments to make multi-year funding commitments to broadband projects constructed by private sector entities. This would give local governments a pathway to help offset the costs of expanding broadband in their communities. Another proposal that was raised to us would have the state establish a tax credit to offset the pole attachment fees that broadband providers pay for attaching their equipment to utility poles in the state. In its discussion of these proposals, the draft report emphasizes two things. First, it emphasizes the importance of the build-out requirements that are included in the state's current grant program, which help to protect the state if projects fail and tie receipt of government funding directly to expansion of broadband access. Second, the draft report emphasizes ECD's decision to cap the state's share of project costs under the grant program at 50%. While the exact structure of the grant program's requirements might not be transferable to every state or local incentive that might be adopted, the goal of reducing cost or reducing risk to taxpayers is. So because of this, the draft report recommends that state and local governments should consider tying any new incentives for broadband providers directly to coverage expansion, while limiting the overall share of project costs that those incentives pay for. The final draft recommendation in the report addresses the remaining territorial restrictions on electric cooperatives and municipal electric systems that provide broadband in Tennessee. At the time of our 2017 report, municipal electric systems were already authorized to provide broadband within their electric service areas. Consistent with the Commission's 2017 recommendations, Public Chapter 228 established similar authority for electric cooperatives to provide broadband within their electric service areas. Of the 22 electric cooperatives that serve parts of Tennessee, 13 are now either providing broadband or will be in the near future as a result of the authorization that was included in the Act. Now, as I alluded to, with limited exceptions, restrictions in state law prevent electric cooperatives and municipal utilities from providing broadband outside of their electric service areas. Multiple bills in recent legislative sessions of the General Assembly would have eliminated or eased these territorial restrictions. Proponents of doing so say that the restrictions prevent electric cooperatives and municipal utilities from providing broadband in areas that they would otherwise be willing and able to serve, including some areas that are currently unserved by other providers. But even without these current restrictions, cost will still be a barrier in some communities, and the potentially high cost of building broadband networks introduces risks to which electric cooperatives and municipal utilities are not immune. Who shoulders these risks is important. Like any other provider, electric cooperatives and municipal utilities often take on debt to finance the construction of their broadband networks. Some have financed the construction of their networks by pledging electric system assets or revenues as collateral for loans. Municipal utilities have financed their networks using bonds backed either by electric ratepayers or by municipal taxpayers, and both are permitted under state law and under their wholesale power contracts with the Tennessee Valley Authority to make loans from their electric operations to their broadband operations, provided that certain conditions are met. For debts that are backed by electric system assets or revenues, if broadband revenue isn't enough to make debt payments, a utility's or a cooperative's electric ratepayers shoulder the risk of repaying them. Broadband customers outside its electric service area do not shoulder these risks. When it comes to projects inside a cooperative's or utility's electric territory, these risks can be justified, at least in part, based on the benefits to electric ratepayers resulting from communications networks that support management of the electric grid. But this dual justification does not exist for a cooperative or utility outside of its electric service area. TVA already prohibits the cooperatives and utilities it serves from using their electric operations to subsidize their broadband operations. Any use of electric system assets or revenues to support the operation of a cooperative's or utility's broadband operations must be approved by TVA. And TVA has not yet determined whether it would approve the use of electric system assets or revenues to finance the construction of broadband networks outside a cooperative's or utilities electric service area, according to the TVA staff who we interviewed. State law also prohibits electric cooperatives and municipal utilities from using their electric operations to subsidize their broadband operations. However, these provisions don't prevent cooperatives or utilities from pledging electric system assets or revenues to finance the construction of their broadband networks within their electric service areas. Because of the risks involved in broadband projects generally and the potential risk to electric ratepayers specifically, the draft report recommends that if the state were to eliminate or ease existing territorial restrictions on electric cooperatives and municipal electric systems, it should consider ways that it can protect electric ratepayers, for example, by prohibiting these cooperatives or utilities from pledging, loaning, or otherwise using electric system assets or revenues to finance broadband projects outside their electric service areas. This concludes my presentation of the draft and the draft recommendations. I'm happy to answer or address any additional comments that you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Owen.
This is Jill Holland. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say the floor is now open for questions or comments.
Okay, this is Jill Holland. Did I understand you to say that you are proposing that the cooperatives can go outside their area, their network, in order to provide the broadband to an area where their cooperative may not be doing that? Did I understand you to say that or not?
I think if I could just clarify, I think the draft report in the draft recommendation does not take a position on whether the state should or should not ease or eliminate the territorial restriction on electric cooperatives. What that draft recommendation says is simply if the state were to do something like that, that it should consider ways that it can protect electric ratepayers. So currently, the draft does not take a position on whether the state should or shouldn't change policy in that way. It just simply says that if the state were to do it, here is a recommendation from the commission as to a guardrail that should be put in place.
Okay, and did you also say that they would be attached, the broadband would be attached to the existing utility poles?
Yes, that obviously can vary from build to build, but in areas where the construction of the network is above ground, then yes, it's very common and for the fiber optic cable or whatever wireline connection is being deployed for that to be located on utility poles. I think in Tennessee, the last estimate that I had seen is that 80% of those utility poles in Tennessee are owned by either municipal electric systems or electric cooperatives.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Holland. I understand that Commissioner Sammy Arnold has a question for Dr. Owen. Commissioner?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Matt, great job, as always. Wondered if you'd comment on whether a 3 megabit upload speed is good enough to support two-way video capabilities for, Zoom and WebEx and so forth, which obviously the need for that is just skyrocketed the past 9 months.
So thank you. That's a great question, and I think that also speaks to the need for the state to think about sort of forward-looking as to what technology was deployed that could be, for lack of a better term, future-proof. So to what we found, and we covered some of this on, let me see if I can find the exact pages of the report. So I think we covered some of this in the back section on pages 18 and 19 in the draft report. So when you look at the system requirements or the connection requirements that are recommended from a lot of the commonly used video conferencing platforms, including Zoom, including GoToMeeting that we're using right now, they all say that a 3 megabit per second upload speed should be fast enough. Now, as we note in the report, there's at least one major university system that's recommending that its students have greater access speeds. And we also know from talking with providers that after the onset of the pandemic, they have seen that many of their customers are increasing their speeds because of their increased use at home. So when it comes to what speed is going to fit your needs, I think the other thing to remember is that it will also depend on the number of individuals who are sharing your connection at one time. So the more people you have at your house who are trying to Zoom or go to class or go to work may affect whether a certain speed is enough for you. Now, I know ECD's current grant program does try to take this into account, I think, in the scoring metrics, as you're well aware, obviously, but just for for the benefit of our other members and for any of those listening, that the scalability of technology as to whether it can be provide expansions in speed or increases in speed in the future is one of the metrics that is taken into consideration by ECD staff when they are scoring grant applications. And so I think that is that's a very good point and a very good takeaway for the future, is that technologies that can be expanded are going to be important, just so that we can make sure that we are able to cover any future needs.
That's great, Matt. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any other comments or questions from members of the commission? Cliff and April, if you could help me monitor if someone indicates. In the interim, Dr. Owen, thank you for this report. I've already commented about its thoroughness and excellence in the way that you all have continued to do this. And as we look forward to the final report in January, on page 24, you mentioned in the report about the mapping that the state of Georgia has commenced. You referenced a number of times in the full report of the FCC data and how the census block is not the best. I think when Chairman Crawford gets his map and is able to see it, it will be even more glaringly obvious. In fact, when the state of Georgia created their own map, you say on page 24 that the Georgia's new map showed a 32% increase in the number of census blocks designated as unserved. That means it's a third wrong on the FCC chart. And I think there are many communities like mine that are going to greatly benefit from a better mapping system. I also understand your comments about not wanting to make a statement either for or against in some of these issues. But I'm wondering if a stronger recommendation on the state of Tennessee creating its own map would in fact be pertinent and substantially helpful. Dr. Owen, I'll let you try and answer that if possible.
That is certainly something that I think the state could do, and that is I'll be at the will of the members as to whether that is a recommendation that we wish to include in the report. We were actually just had the great fortune of being able to speak with officials from Georgia about their mapping process just yesterday afternoon, and so they were able to provide commission staff, specifically me and Lieu, with a little bit more information about the process that they have gone through to get their maps where they are. It was more involved than I was hoping to hear, but it's something that I'm sure that we have the capability of doing if that's something that the state wishes to pursue. I would agree with your statement that having more granular coverage data would be a great benefit for the state. I think the only thing looming in the horizon is on that page that you mentioned. We do know that the federal government, there's been a federal law passed that directs the FCC to improve the quality of its coverage data in a way that will hopefully show more specifically which locations do have service and which ones don't. What we're in a little bit of limbo with right now is the timeline on when that map will be implemented, with the FCC saying in response that they have not yet been appropriated the funding necessary for them to undertake the improvement in their data collection and presentation. And then, of course, once they get that data, the question always remains, what of that, at what level would that be made available to the state for its own uses? So that's certainly something that, something that the state can pursue, and I'd be happy to try to come up with more information for the final report on what that might cost the state, as well as whether there are options for the state to either do that in-house or contract out with third parties. We do know that there are some entities that will provide this work for the state. It's available.
Could I add a comment, Mr. Chairman?
Certainly, absolutely.
It just came to me as Matt was describing the FCC process for their maps, that the thought that even if we were to pursue, if Tennessee were to pursue its own maps as Georgia has done, and the FCC was able to actually expedite their own maps, there is some benefit to having two sets of maps, and I think it's almost analogous to the state preparing its own census estimates and projections, which it does and has served on a number of occasions to allow the state to question the official census counts, and in some cases have those amended. So we could find ourselves in a similar situation with mapping, where the FCC map might be of benefit, but if the state's maps are more granular, they might be more beneficial.
Thank you, Dr. Lippert. I would concur with that. And my only comment to Dr. Owen's excellent response is that waiting on the federal government appropriation, I have a 10-year delay on a veteran's home, simply waiting on federal appropriation. So I don't have a good history with that. No disrespect to our federal friends that are watching and my friends, but it definitely seems to be something that the state could take on. Again, this is not taking a position for or against. This is rather helping make the decisions at the legislative level based on better empirical data. And I'm happy to have any other members of the commission voice any questions or concerns or agreements.
Mayor Brooks, I agree with you, and I don't know why in our next draft we couldn't make the recommendation that the state of Tennessee do its own mapping so that we have more accurate data information for the legislature. If that's an issue, we vote on it next time, whether or not to keep it in the report. But if we put it in there, it's more likely to be something we pay attention to. Whereas if we don't, so I would think that would be something we could work into the report and consider on its final passage.
Thank you, Mayor Bickers. Ms. Gaither, County Clerk Gaither.
Yes, sir. I agree with you, Chairman and Mayor Bickers. Is it something that we can get the providers that are currently providing this service across the state of Tennessee, part of their report, to report the locations of the broadband that is available?
And are you meaning the speeds 25.3 and et cetera?
Can you hear me? Part of their report being the availability and then the speeds as well.
Agreed. And I think that goes back to the comments from Commissioner Arnold about whether or not the speeds are sufficient. We've got multiple users and multiple applications going in our house almost all the time. And 25.3 is not sufficient for my census block. Any other comments or questions from members of the commission? And Dr. Lippert, a parliamentary question. Mayor Bickers, County Clerk Gaither, and I have all three recommended that the mapping be included in January's report. Does that require a vote of the commission or simply this recommendation verbally?
I believe just the recommendation verbally, Mr. Chairman. I'm assuming there's no objection. I don't think it requires a vote.
Is there any objection to that recommendation from the members of the commission? If so, speak now or forever hold your peace.
Looks like we're married to it.
I believe we're also speaking for Chairman Carter. If he were here, he would want this as well.
I have a feeling that he is listening somewhere at this very moment and critiquing my performance. Any other comments or questions from the commission for Dr. Owen? Cliff, if you could, or April, check the chat and make sure that we don't have any questions or any comments coming in on that as well.
Seeing none, Mr. Chairman.
Great, thank you. Dr. Owen, thank you for this report. I look forward to the conversation continuing and getting back together in January for the final presentation, which I believe Mr. Lippard concludes the agenda for today's, the 17th meeting, but we do need to go ahead and discuss the date for January in our other business.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. And we do have one issue with the timing of the January meeting, and that is that the final report that Matt just presented the draft on broadband access and adoption is due to the General Assembly on January 15. So we obviously would need to meet and approve the report before that time. So what I would like to propose, Mr. Chairman, is that as we did in preparing for this meeting, perhaps April could poll the members. I can give you a couple of tentative dates, and then she can poll the members to see which of those dates might work best for the most members. And the dates I had in mind, allowing for time to everyone to get through the holidays and also to allow the report to be approved on time, were potentially January 7th or January 13th.
All right, thank you, Dr. Lippard. January 7th is a Thursday, and you said 13th Wednesday?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
So my only question would be, is that cutting it too close to the 15th statutory deadline?
So in this case, the report is in nearly final shape, other than adding the new language for the recommendation on the map. So the 7th may be better. Normally, I like to make sure we allow enough time for formatting and getting the reports in final presentation mode. There is still some work to be done on this one, as Matt mentioned, the development district level maps, but we were in pretty good shape. So it probably makes more sense in this case to try to do it earlier rather than later, to allow enough time in case there are any other changes at the last minute at the meeting, so we can meet that deadline.
Why don't we ask April to poll the members for Jan 7, 13, and 14 and see which out of that 3 that everyone is most able to meet and get the quorum necessary.
We can do that, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Is there any other business, Dr. Lippard, and as the director or members of the commission, is there anything that needs to be addressed before we adjourn?
I have none, Mr. Chairman. I'm seeing nothing from the members.
Thank you. Ms. Spires, if you could please, I'm not sure if you were logged in when we sent our greetings to the retiring beloved comptroller earlier in the meeting, but if you could let him know that we are thankful for his decades of service to our state, and for those of us that have had the pleasure of serving alongside of him, we are better people for that, and thank him for his service.
I will do that. Thank you so much for those kind words.
Without any other business on the agenda, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
That's a non-debatable motion. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Merry
you.
Christmas.
Thank you.